Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Pangolin Advisor and I will be analyzing Craver ships. Unlike many other factions, Cravers crave only destruction and care not for what other factions believe to be personal wealth. They only want to feed, and they feed on literally anything they can find, and their gameplay reflects that. They are a faction that I would consider to be difficult to learn, but they're relatively easy to master after you've done that. You have to be careful not to let them eat each other and devour their planets dry and then stagnate. And for that reason, Cravers must be constantly on the move, constantly seeking out new places to expand to exploit. And later on, they have to constantly eradicate anybody who happens to live on the planets they want to exploit. And for that reason they need to have a military that can do that. Is it up to the task? Let us find out. As a side note before we begin our discussion of individual ship designs, I have to mention the fact that Cravers also are notoriously good at making ships fast. They can produce a large quantity of ships in a very short amount of time, and they will have ample minerals to do so, provided that their planets aren't yet depleted. So we have to keep in mind that in most situations Cravers will have the numbers advantage. Moreover, they also can have more ships in a single fleet than other factions, which is again an important thing to consider. So without further ado, let us begin talking about a ship nicknamed the Slicer. The most basic attacker in the Craver ship of the soldier class. What does it have to offer for us? Let us find out. First of all, we see that it has two weapons. One of them is top mounted and one is side mounted, which makes it relatively standard in terms of what attacker ships can offer you without upgrades. It has a dedicated defense module, a dedicated support module, and a mix of the two as well. Meaning that you have relative freedom in how you want to spec up this ship, but generally speaking you want to have two defense and a utility, as you might imagine. Obviously going for damage amplifiers whenever possible. Now, something to keep in mind is that this ship isn't very special in terms of what it offers at its face value, and it might seem a little bit unbecoming of a warlike faction like Cravers that never does any diplomacy. Well, almost never. However, this ship is already better than Volter's or Amboquire's attackers, and it is only slightly inferior to Unfallen design, because the Unfallen design has two top-mounted weapons, giving it a bit more versatility in combat. Now, in a pinch, this ship one-on-one could also fire to United Empire's or Horatio's designs, I suppose. But keep in mind, this ship should never fight enemies that have equal numbers to them. You always want to have superior numbers and superior firepower that comes within. However, superior firepower, can we achieve that in some other way or amplify it? Well, let us try upgrading this ship. Now this is where the magic starts to happen. As you can see, upgrading this ship gives us an extra side-mounted weapon, an extra utility slot, and a top-mounted module that you can equip with anything you want, a weapon, a defense module, or utility. And this means that in total you can have at a maximum 3 defensive modules, and since this is an attacker ship, realistically speaking, you only have at most 2, since you want to have as many guns as possible. What it means is that this is the most fragile attacker ship out of all attackers you can find in the game, once obviously you maximize its damage potential, which you absolutely should do. That being said, it does have top tier damage, because not a single attacker ship can have more than 4 weapons installed at the same time, and you also have enough utility slots to amplify their damage should you choose to do so. Now, you might expect that, okay, now I'm going to tell you to install some defenses on it and whatnot, make it more agile and less likely to get hit, and I'll tell you instead not to do that, provided you have the economy to support such a decision. Here's my line of thought. This ship, no matter what you do, is the most agile in its class. How about we just ditch all defenses altogether, turn it from a glass cannon to basically a paper cannon, but that cannon is a railgun, not just your typical pirate cannon. This ship's firepower will be enough to cleave through enemies' fleets in no time, potentially allowing you to kill the enemy before they even have a chance to fire back. And if you cut down on the defense that would do you very little good anyway, then it means that those ships will cost you quite a bit less and allow you to create more of them, even though they will die like flies to a proper enemy fleet. Nevertheless, you are supposed to be a faction that swarms the enemy, and with such setup, you'll be quite difficult to handle, I can assure you. Of course, you have to keep in mind you need to have the economy to do so, but this ship is here to guarantee that you do have the economy to do so. Now, of course, it has its drawbacks, and this kind of setup will never ever work against attackers of Sophons, Riftborn or Lumeris. They have good firepower and good defense, meaning that they will cut you down before you can cut them down. Moreover, you should probably respect the Vodianian and the Fallen designs, as they are quite tanky, so with this particular setup they'll be able to probably destroy you before you can destroy them as well, although it does depend on fleet composition a lot. If you were to pretend that this is a normal ship and just give it some defenses and whatnot and invest more into it, then what you're looking at is a pretty mediocre or even actually just a bad design, which is a flying coffin for you to waste your resources on. I think this is an excellent ship to upgrade and a very deadly glass cannon, and that should you do so, you should never try to treat it as anything other than a glass cannon. I am pleased to say that the Craver Protector type ship doesn't disappoint. It's commonly nicknamed as a Marauder ship, and it's of worker class variety. After we have a look at it, we can see that it only has one weapon, which is nothing strange for a protector ship, but it is a top-mounted weapon, allowing it great versatility, and also you can install a flat cannon on top just to protect yourself from some missiles if necessary. Very good use for that. Additionally, this ship also has two dedicated defense modules, a support module, and finally a mix of the two. In total, this is actually a good tank for your ships, especially the upgraded glass cannon variant of your attacker ship. So if I were to make a recommendation, I would upgrade your attacker ships first, because this ship already has good amount of defense to tank the damage for your very fragile upgraded attacker ships. Of course, you are then left with only a single utility slot, which might be a little bit stifling. So let's see if that issue is resolved once you take extra step to upgrade this little boy. As it turns out, Walker class has a very good upgrade, which offers you extra 2 utility slots and also a weapon / defense / utility module. This gives you a little bit of extra variety and versatility that was much needed for a ship of this kind in the early game. The most important part is that it has now become not only a mainstay tank, but also good battle support and a good invasion carrier. Because keep in mind, as Cravers, you shouldn't only win space battles, although that is necessary, you also need to transport troops. And this ship will be able to transport a lot of them, even if you do install engines on it or whatever. Keep in mind that Craver troops are notoriously deadly and will outperform most other defense or invasion forces. Overall, I think this is a very good upgrade to invest in, as this can be not only your invasion ship, it can also be your battle support, it can also be your tank. And especially as a tank loadout, I would say this is very much an essential ship for your fleet, as your coordinator vessel is not as good of a tank as this little boy, despite the health difference of course, which you should always take into consideration. Nevertheless, this is a rather potent little design that, when paired up with upgraded attacker ship in the early game, will be quite unstoppable in large numbers and very difficult for your opponents to handle. This is how you rush the enemy down. Of course, like I mentioned, this is also potentially your dedicated tank ship, meaning that you can also take it with you into middle and perhaps the late game as well. Speaking of the middle game, let us move on to somewhat bigger designs. The next ship on our plate is nicknamed the Butcher. It is a Bishop class hunter, and let us check how well it serves the Craver fleet. As you can see, it has a fair amount of damage for an unupgraded hunter ship with a whopping amount of 4 weapon modules. 2 of them are in fact also top mounted, which means that it is quite versatile, and I would say it's above average in terms of its gun placement. Quite a bit above average in fact, I dare say, making it quite efficient at engaging enemy fleets at many different angles. Additionally, it can have up to 3 different defense slots, which is a very much welcome thing, and of course as also precious utility slot for your weapon amplifier. This is quite a decent ship. It has decent defense, good damage. I mean, hunters don't really have more damage when they are not upgraded, but nevertheless it still suffers from a typical Craver problem in that Cravers prefer quantity over quality, and as such you would rather have more of those ships than your enemy, because in a straight one-on-one fight it is the unupgraded ship is only really going to beat down Volter's Unfallen, Umbraquois or Sophon's Hunter, and it is also marginally weaker than United Empire's Hunter as well. Nevertheless, it is already a fine enough ship as it is. Let us check out what happens when you decide to upgrade this bad boy. An upgraded Bishop class gets basically a bit more of everything, making it a good mainstay ship for longer campaigns. It gets a large weapon module, a defense/utility module, and a dedicated utility module. Admittedly, it maybe doesn't need a second one, but it doesn't have to have a second utility module either, in case you want to increase the ship's chance of evasion or do something else that is more tricky or better thought out. Nevertheless, it is weaker than its upgraded competition, unfortunately, and only wins really against the Umbraquois Hunter, and is barely capable of taking down a Sophon or a Volter Hunter due to its superior gun placement that favors 270 degrees arc of firing weapons. Overall, what is my opinion on the Hunter class? Even though it has much better competition in most regards, especially if we compare the upgraded variants of the Hunter ship, it is still a nice, reliable ship. And in my honest opinion, you could easily spam the unupgraded version and still be fine. By spamming the unupgraded version, you save some of the strategic resources you would have to spend on the upgrades, you save on a bit of industry cost as well. And even the unupgraded ship, while nothing special, is still going to be able to stick it out in combat in case you are planning to stay at war with somebody for longer than Cravers are usually comfortable with. For short blitzkrieg campaigns, I would absolutely encourage you to instead use the glasscan strategy of upgraded attackers and upgraded protectors. But should you decide that this is not going to work in your case, this is a good replacement, but you don't need to necessarily bother with the upgrade, barring certain situations of course. The time has come for Craver's dedicated fleet support. A Reaper named ship, which is a guard class coordinator, deserves a fairly different approach compared to some of its competitors. Let's explain why really quickly. As you take a quick look at it, you quickly realize that it has the lowest defense of all coordinators in the game right now, together with the Volter design. making it rather tricky to use in battle, since even if you max out on defense modules, you'll still only have 3 of those. Now, what I personally would rather have it used for is out-of-use combat, being primarily invasions, as it can have a very good amount of 5 utility modules which all can fit a lot of extra Craver dedicated killers, making planetary invasion particularly easy. And I believe this is exactly what this ship is envisioned for. Moving from point A to point B and making sure that point B becomes yours once the trash in space is sorted out. Moreover, should you choose to actually install some weapons on it, you have 2 slots for that purpose as well. Let us have, however, a quick look at what happens when you upgrade this ship. If you were hoping to bring this ship into battle with some upgrades, I have bad news for you, as upgrading makes this ship slightly tankier, but still rather fragile. For that reason, it is an abysmally bad fleet tank, and that is why this role should fall to your protector's ships instead, because even though you do have the health advantage, it is also not a very big one, as Craver ships, generally speaking, also have less health than the ships of other races. Upgrading gives you an extra set amount of weapon, however, and a top mounted large weapon, as well as an extra potential utility module. And this means that while true, this ship is probably still best used as an out-of-battle support ship, but you could try to make it a more durable version of a glass cannon. Now, when would you want and need to do that? The answer is actually quite simple. If you are struggling against enemy glass cannony type of hunters or attackers, not even necessarily glass cannony, but if you want to snipe them, and you are not afraid of necessarily losing your ship to overwhelming firepower, which is a very rare circumstance, but nevertheless, if you do want to snipe enemy attackers and hunters, then you could potentially bring this ship, as it will bypass the enemy protector and coordinator ships and go straight for the meat, and with 4 weapons in total, 2 of them top mounted as well, it is going to perform rather well. Additionally, something else to consider is potentially installing just a bunch of squadrons on top of this ship, as they will also go for fragile targets, and this will allow you to deploy this ship in flotillas that are far away from the enemy line of fire. If you do this, then the ship will be able to effectively harass the enemy attackers without necessarily being exposed to firepower itself, making it have some uses once it is upgraded. Personally, however, I would say that unless you specifically need something that would give you some extra oomph against enemy fragile attackers or hunters, then you needn't bother with upgrading the ship or even bringing it into battle altogether, unless you maybe want to have 1 or 2 at max of ships of this kind just to give your fleet some extra buffs, but again, protectors can do that. And if you choose to ignore the protectors and still use the coordinator for that choice, I still don't think it's necessarily necessary to upgrade it. Although if you have enough resources, then why not? Go for it. Craver's carriers are perhaps not exactly what you would expect out of them, especially when you consider that they're nicknamed Annihilators. Well, let us dive deeper. They are of the Queen class variety, and what do they bring into the fray? Well, honestly, when you have a look at the weapon mounts, I'll tell you that they don't bring a whole lot of them, having only 4 weapon mounts. Although, to be fair, it is nice that 2 of them are top mounted, giving them some much needed versatility and variety. Nevertheless, if you were to compare those ships to their equivalents for other factions, you would quickly realize that unfortunately this ship doesn't perform well at all. In fact, it only has very few decent enough matchups, and I would say that it is only slightly superior to Vodiani and the Volter carriers, and it is also better than the Umbra ship as well. However, you have to keep in mind that despite the name, this ship is not meant to eradicate In my opinion, the Craver carrier is meant to be a tanky fleet support. It does have that your quote-unquote tanky carrier has a less HP as a result of a faction trait that lowers your ship HP. But nevertheless, it can perform that role quite well. So if I were to reset this design real quick and demonstrate, you could bring it into a fight with a bunch of support modules that will make it more likely to be targeted, give you some extra fleet cloaking because why not, give you the ability to see enemy fleet, again why not. Let's see what modules, yeah, those are just dedicated module slots. This ship does have quite a few dedicated module slots. Then I'll give it probably a bunch of squadrons just to harass the enemy. On the top, I will definitely give it a flak weapon so it can shoot down incoming missiles and also deal an okay amount of damage when nice, close and personal. And some defense modules to boot. And now we've got a fairly decent support ship for the beginnings of the late game. As I said, this carrier will not make anybody just walk out and surrender when they see one on the battlefield. That's not what it is meant to do. I think that it fulfills the role of a support ship better than your coordinators do. So bringing one for your fleet might not be a bad idea, but at the same time, I believe if you don't want to do so, or if you have other ships that already fulfill all of their roles well enough, then you might as well also just not research a carrier in the first place. But what happens when you do research a carrier and then you upgrade it? Sadly, the Annihilator still struggles in direct combat even after it is upgraded. It is marginally better than Lumerius and Volta's carriers because of its superior gun placement. However, for the same reason, it is actually somewhat weaker than the Umbraquois carrier, which is truly an insult to have the pitiful Umbraquois have a better carrier than the Craver's carrier in combat. But keep in mind that such comparisons are perhaps unnecessary and misrepresent this carrier's true purpose. In my opinion, with upgrades more so than ever, this ship is meant for something other than distraction. Instead, you can make it one of the tankiest carriers out there, because it can house a sadly respectable amount of maximum 7 defensive modules. Wait, I got that right, that's 8 defensive modules. Well, I guess I was wrong somewhere on my notes. Oh no, never mind, I simply can't count, that is actually 7. Good, I was for a second really confused. Nevertheless, it is certainly a respectable amount, and it helps make up for its HP loss due to the Craver faction trait. Now, if you also decide to give this ship a little bit of utility and maybe some bombers as well to top it off, and of course a bunch of top-mounted weapons because it is after all a carrier, then what you end up with is certainly a decent fleet support that can make your fleet cloaked or be able to detect cloak, and of course you could have your other ships fulfill the same role of a cloak and whatnot, but it can still draw some fire, and if you just use this ship as a means to draw fire, this will actually make your other ships quite well defended. And overall it does give you quite a few options, decent amount of variety and plenty of choices. Overall, I think this is an excellent flagship for a Craver fleet. It's lacking in the offense, sure, but it can still sit somewhere on the side of a battle and provide good support. Although if you do want to deploy it far away from the main battle, I'd probably give it missiles. Or instead, here's a bright idea. Give it, oh yeah, well, not boarding pods because you cannot give them onto the top level unless you place squadrons with boarding pods, which is always an idea to consider. And then you now have a ship that can board the enemy ships relatively effectively, which is certainly an interesting design. Quite costly, however. It would require more of an investment than your Craver ships usually do. And you have to keep in mind that as a Craver you should always value quantity over quality. But for the situations when you want to make your countless ships shine just a little bit brighter against your opponents, using carriers as support is not a bad idea at all. As a side note, because I realized I should probably stress this out, carriers cannot have some of the support modules that your protectors or coordinators could otherwise have. For instance, the very much so important Flotilla Shield or the H-Field Fleet Accelerator, which are very nice modules to have. So keep that in mind, but even without those, I believe that your carrier can still be quite a nice bullet sponge for your fleet. And finally, this brings us to some of your more peaceful ships, although such word is unbecoming in the mouth of a Craver. First of all, let us have a look at your drone, not the drone class, at your Forager class Explorer, which unfortunately isn't very well designed, but at the same time it will do its job okay. See, the issue with this ship is that without upgrade, keep in mind one of these modules is an upgrade, and when you start the game, the ship will not have such module. So without the modules, it will only have 2 places for engines and or probes, making it rather inefficient at exploring the galaxy. If you are looking for something faster, you can use your drone class instead and fill it with engines, which is a fairly standard tactic that most of the factions can use. Poor exploration is perhaps a bigger drawback for Cravers than it is for other factions, as you desperately need to know where are more worlds for you to devour and conquer. Nevertheless, it will make do. It is a drawback for sure, but not necessarily a substantial one. And with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, this will be enough for my guide. I hope you enjoyed this. I wasn't able to incorporate any feedback you may have left on the United Empire guide for the very simple reason that by the time of recording of this video, the United Empire guide hasn't gone live yet, so I couldn't read the feedback from the future. I mean, maybe I could, but this would require too much effort, you know. Regardless, I appreciate any feedback you might leave, so if you want to leave feedback beneath this video, please feel free to do so as well. It was Pangolin Advisor, also known as Pancha, so thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you online.